Hi, everybody. My name is Suzannah Scully, and I am a career and executive coach who helps people connect who they are with what they do. Today, I am so excited to have a dear friend of mine, Dr. Leslie Carr, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and relationship expert, and she recently wrote a phenomenal ebook called When Change Takes Time. So welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much for having me, Susanna. It's really nice to be here with you.
Yay! So, well, first I just have to say I devoured your ebook in one night. You sent it over and I literally just sat as my husband watched sports and I just sat and read the entire thing and loved it. It was so insightful and helpful. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for saying that. I love hearing that.
Yeah. So what I'd love to talk about today is, just to give an overview of the book, really it is about how we become the way we are and why we make the choices that we make. Is that right? Is that how you'd sum it
Yeah,
up?
absolutely. I think that's a pretty succinct way to say it. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so what I'd love to talk about today is something you talked about that really was impactful to me was the formative experiences in our lives that create the limiting beliefs that we have. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Absolutely. I would love to. I think that just to back up a tiny bit, because I think sometimes it can be helpful to talk about this stuff by giving it a little bit of context.
Right.
One of the reasons why I got into that in the book, and one of the reasons why it felt really important to me to sort of unpack that and sort of explore it in the way that I did, is because I think that we live in a culture that tends to overemphasize our biology, right? It's not to say that our biology doesn't matter, biochemistry doesn't matter, but we live in a culture that tends to overemphasize that piece of things, right? You know, that if you have depression, that means you have a chemical imbalance and that means you need to take a pill, right?
Yes.
And I think that, that's true in certain instances, but it's definitely not the whole story. And that's not necessarily the case for everybody who is struggling with something, be it depression or something else. And I think that if you look at something like self-limiting beliefs, I think a big part of what I wanted to get into in the book and what I did get into in the book is what happens that's not necessarily biological, right?
Yes.
That we have these experiences in life that ultimately pretty much every experience we have is formative on some level. We have these brains that are sort of built to learn. We're always learning from our experiences. And those experiences tend to shape the way we see ourselves, see the world around us, see other people, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think if we're talking specifically about sort of self-limiting beliefs, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people will often have experiences that are negative on some level. They get negative feedback about something. They have an experience of maybe not performing as well at something as they would like to. And then they sort of develop a belief system around that, right? Usually it doesn't happen from one event, but it'll happen, let's say, from multiple events. And sometimes these things tend to feed on themselves, right? We have a bad experience, we interpret it a certain way, we now look at the world with a specific lens, that gets reinforced.
Yes.
And so I think that's a big piece of what we're talking about here, if that answers your
It
question.
does. And I think, do you see in your clients that those limiting beliefs become reality for them, right? That they don't necessarily, I know I see this with my clients, that they don't see it as a belief as much as they see as this is fact, this is the way it is. Is that true?
Precisely. I think
Yeah.
absolutely. I think you
Yeah.
put it really well.
Yeah.
And also then, just to compound it a little bit further, when people are operating in the world with these beliefs, that to your point, they don't even know are beliefs, they also then tend to create a reality that supports that, right? Because, for example, if you think about, let's say, some of the people you might work with as a career coach,
Yeah.
if somebody has a hard time going after the job they really want because they believe on some level, let's say, that they won't get it, they don't deserve it, whatever the case may be, they then might not ever try and then never have an experience that disconfirms that. They might do something self-sabotaging as they go about trying because of this belief that they're not going to get what they want, so we can kind of create our reality on that level too.
So let's go with that for a moment, because a lot of my viewers and readers are interested in career development and professional development. So let's imagine that I have a limiting belief around that I cannot do what I love and get paid. I think that's a very common limiting belief.
Yes.
So staying with the when change takes time, what are some of the steps that we can take to start shifting those limiting beliefs? What would you say?
Well, I would say first things first, going back again to your point from before,
Yeah.
you actually have to recognize that it's a belief,
Yes.
right? As silly as it's going to sound on some level, it sort of sounds so simple, right? But it's kind of deceptive.
Right.
The single most important thing that we can do, I think, is start to recognize the way that we think.
Okay.
Actually start to sort of see our beliefs for what they are, to kind of notice the way that we think about things, thoughts that we have that cross our mind.
Yeah.
For example, now that let's say somebody's watched this video, they find themselves thinking precisely that thought, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that thought has crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I can't do what I want and get paid.
Yeah.
Now they might have an experience of thinking, oh, but that's just a thought. That doesn't mean it's reality. That doesn't mean it's the truth. It's just a thought that I had. So I think first things first, we have to actually recognize the way that we're thinking about things, right?
Great. And so let's say we've done that. Okay, so now I say, okay, great. That is a belief that is not true. This is what I believe. How can I start to shift that limiting belief?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think a lot of this stuff can be really hard to do on our own.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do this stuff in a vacuum. And I would actually say that if nothing else, once somebody has recognized that they have that belief, the best thing that they could probably do is talk about it with a really good friend.
Yes.
Bring it up with somebody that they trust and talk about it and see if they can kind of create a little space around that thought, right? Because if you talk about it with a friend, especially a good friend, let's hope, right? Who's got your back.
Yeah.
Hopefully that person will then maybe give you another thought to think, like, hey, maybe that's not true because here's maybe a way that it's not true. If you see what I mean.
Yes, to start reframing it.
Exactly. To bring new ideas into the mill, right? Because we can sort of get stuck in certain ways of thinking. And I think it can be pretty hard to break out of that completely by ourselves. We sort of need other people's thoughts to bounce things off of.
I find that to be so true. I think we really are hardwired to interact with each other in terms of really shifting beliefs in our mind or making any sort of change on your own. And this has just been in my own personal experience and with my clients. There is something about the way we are hardwired that change comes when it's bounced off of two people.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, you're right on about that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, Leslie, so much for being here with us today.
You're very welcome.
And I'd actually love to continue the conversation, maybe perhaps in other forms. But I recommend for everybody to check out your ebook, When Change Takes Time. And if you could share with everyone where they can find out more online about you and the book.
I think probably the single easiest place to go is just to my main website, which is lesliecarr.com.
Perfect. And that's lesliecarr.com.
Precisely.
Perfect. And so thank you again for your time. And as always, I can be found at Suzannah Scully on Twitter or at suzannahscully.com. And I look forward to talking with everyone soon. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.